Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the TestGuild Automation Podcast. And today we'll be talking with Shubham all about how to create testing magic with zero code using a tool I just learned about, and I think it's really going to help you with your automation, especially with API testing. Shubham is actually the maintainer of Keploy, which is an API testing platform. API testing is becoming more and more popular, and I think this is a solution that's going to help everyone be more efficient with their API testing. He is the former consultant at AWS India, contributor to XWiki, and he also has led data and platform engineering teams across the world. He loves talking about developer productivity and next-gen problems and solutions, and he's going to share one of those solutions with you today that I think you're really going to get a lot of value from. You don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. Hey, Shubham, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Excited to be here. Thanks.
Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to learn more about Keploy. Before we get into it, though, is there anything I missed in your bio that you want the guild to know more about?
Oh, I think that covered most of it. Something I think interesting would be I've been part of Google Summer of Code. It's a very interesting program run by the team at Google's, and it got me into open source. Both as a contributor as well as, I later started mentoring for Google Summer of Code with XWiki. So I think that has been really phenomenal. And the team at Google Summer of Code is, really cool. I really enjoy still being part of them, part of the program with Keploy.
Awesome. How do you become part of that program? Do you submit an application and then they go through it?
Yeah, so you can apply as an organization, and once the organizations are picked, students, earlier it was only open to students, so students apply. Now I think it's open to more people, and then the organizations pick based on the contributions and the student profiles.
Awesome. So here's a dumb question right off the bat. What's the difference between a maintainer and a contributor? It says, since you are the maintainer of Keploy, are you the lead guy that says no or yes to the final build?
Kind of, yes, yeah. So the maintainers obviously have more access. They are more involved in the decision making process. Once you've done a certain level of contributions and you control a big part of what's going on. So that's basically a difference between a maintainer and a contributor.
Awesome. So what got you excited about Keploy that you wanted to be the maintainer and contribute to it?
Well, so my team started it. So Since we started, we had to be the maintainer to ensure it runs. Yeah.
Why did you create it then? What was the meaning? What was the main issue you saw that you're like, there's open solutions everywhere. There's solutions vendor based, but not meeting the need of this particular pain point you were seeing.
Yeah. So I've at my previous teams, what we were doing was we were mostly focused on R&D and building out, trying out new ideas, taking things from ideation to users in less than 2 weeks, right? And that's when the way our team worked did not, essentially the way we worked back then was we would change things and we would deploy nearly on a daily basis. So whatever was out there and whatever we could try in terms of testing, it required a lot of effort. And we were like, okay, we want to test if our application works. We want to make small changes and deploy immediately. So can I just use, my production traffic or what my users are doing and validate if I broke anything really quickly? So that kind of led to, that eventually led to Keploy. And turns out everybody has, it's a very common problem. Everybody wants to make small changes and validate if the application still works. And so we open sourced it, and now here we are.
Nice. So if someone asks you, hey, what is Keploy? What does it do? What's the main tagline or the main feature that it provides developers or testers?
So it's the only eBPF based solution which can capture live traffic and generate test cases and data mocks, um, which you can run as tests. And yeah, like you said, it's also open source.
Completely open source, so anyone can use this. And is there a
Yeah,
paid version or no? Okay, nice.
yeah. There's we are working with select companies as beta partners to try out Keploy in more complex scenarios, where we have streaming or we'll have async workers and things like that. But yeah, as of now, what's open source will mostly stay open source. It's all built on top of this.
Nice. So I'm trying to visualize this for the people that are listening here. So you run, is it like a sniffer in production and then actually listens to real traffic for your application without you guessing? And then it will generate API tests for you that mimic exactly what's happened in production. Is that the main use case?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it does. It can be anywhere, right? It could be somewhere on a dev's laptop where I'm developing an application, and yeah, I can call the API and still generate a test, or in any live environment or a production environment where you could do something like that.
All right. And this is important because as we go cloud native, we may be using services and APIs that we don't even know about. Like we may have a feature on our application like submit, and Lord knows what it's calling behind the scenes. So actually having this in production is able then to create those tests for you and know what endpoints to interact with automatically.
Yep, that's exactly right. What's crazy is we've seen users who have been using different SDKs which they did not make, and turns out a very simple operation was doing like 50 HTTP calls or 50 database queries, and those were largely hidden. And the tests that they wrote earlier were mostly using mocks, so they would mock the entire interface out and never know about it. So when you use Keploy, you're you're able to see everything that the application does, record everything like database queries, external calls, um, and rerun them exactly the same, and see if the application still works. So apart from testing, yeah, it gives you a deeper visibility into what's really happening.
All right. So what do people have to do to get this? Do they have to like instrument their application with open telemetry or something so you can get this type of data in production? Like what needs to be in place before they can use a solution like Keploy?
Nothing really. I mean, so something I mentioned, eBPF. We use eBPF to trace system calls and instrument application without any code changes. So um, yeah, so using Keploy is just you download Keploy, you do Keploy record, and just run your application, and that would generate the test and mocks.
All right. So for folks that don't know, what is eBPF then? Is it an interpreter for languages or something? Or
Yeah, so eBPF is extended Berkeley packet filters. It allows the it allows users to trace system calls. So, for example, if I'm using Linux, my application would be using system calls to do different things like read packets, um, execute any piece of code, get access to memory, to network. So, using eBPF, we can instrument or change or understand the application behavior without actually injecting an SDK inside the application build. And traditionally, it has been used for observability, especially especially by companies like New Relic. They have a project called Pixie. It's also being used heavily in security because um, you can observe applications without needing to change the code. Um, so yeah, we use the same technology to go one step further, not just observe, but also simulate. And so we kind of use that for testing.
nice. So I know one of the benefits is it eliminates the need for data dumps, looking through data dumps, stubs, or mocks for dependencies. How's that done? Like if say you're using a third party dependency, it's in production, it's obviously interacting with it, but then you go to staging or development and you're like, I don't want to use that service, it's going to charge money or it's not available. How does it get rid of mocks then if you are not in
Yeah,
production, I guess? So,
yeah. So it's simple. Once you record something, Keploy essentially acts like a proxy. So um, Yeah, I mean, so you can capture from any environment, let's say production, and then you can rerun it literally anywhere. So essentially, when you use something like Keploy, environments don't matter at all. You could capture different things from different environments and run them together in a single environment. And all that environment will be running is the application and Keploy. So no databases, no external services, no internal services. So typically, what this helps people achieve is they're able to um, within 5 minutes run maybe 500 integration tests in their CI. And if you use something like GitHub Actions, the entire thing runs inside an Actions container. So you don't need any environment to run any of this. So yeah, that's like a use case.
Nice. So who's the main use of this? Would it be a developer before they do a main commit? They would run it through, spin up an environment, run all the tests. Okay, green, promote to the main build.
I think that's the most popular use case we're seeing as of now, because Keploy also integrates with integration testing libraries like JUnit, PyTest, GoTest, and adds to your code coverage. So essentially, normally writing integration tests is hard because it requires effort, plus it's slow, it's expensive. Kepler kind of helps you create those integration tests that also add to your test coverage, and which are insanely easy to make. You just need to use the application, and yeah, and then as a developer, I can run it as part of my CI. But while that's the most popular use case we're seeing as of date, I believe it can be used further um, in other use cases, maybe debugging or augmenting the testing process, especially when it takes a lot of time to write or a lot of time to execute the existing tests in any testing infrastructure.
All right, so that's good. Let's dive into that a little bit more. How you can use it for the testing process. So you'd run it in production. You'd have the test. How would you know what's being covered or how much coverage you have? So you have existing functional UI test and they're slow. And you're like, oh boy, we could probably get a lot of this with API testing, but I have no idea what is being touched by this UI. How do you know, okay, I'm good. I have these 50 API tests and I know that it can replace these lower or slower running UI tests?
So the way that works is Keploy would, while it records tests, it can also capture the coverage information. That okay, what coverage in my code is this able to achieve? And what Keploy can then do is it can use that and figure out, okay, what are the top 50 test cases from, let's say, 10,000 or millions of test cases that I should run. And yeah, I mean, that way I can prioritize instead of running millions of requests. And since Keploy is able to also capture the data calls, it can actually isolate those 50 requests and run them actually run them in a lower environment. So yeah, I mean, that's basically the very, very high level idea.
Do you have any use cases of customers that have done that and you're like, wow, that actually saved them a lot of X amount of time. I didn't know you'd be able to do that.
Yeah, so we keep hearing about different users from the community. For example, one would be Nutanix. And so traditionally, they would need to spin up virtual machines. And they have, I mean, Nutanix has their own data center products and they have their own managed services. So all of them take time to spin up. So one interesting use case for Keploy is there that traditionally, that takes time and effort to maintain as well as run. And they were able to step out most of that and use Keploy as a proxy server and run the tests in like mere seconds, which compared to something which would take like hours because it has to first orchestrate everything and then do the validations. So yeah.
So does it save money on environments then, or containers, runtimes? Because you don't necessarily need thousands of containers spinning up and spending a lot of time being open. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does it help with that?
Yeah, definitely. It does do that.
Nice. All right. So what are some other features then that we may have missed? You mentioned debugging. How can it help with debugging? Does it bubble up insights or does it like, how hard is it to get the data? Because I'm sure it collects a lot of data, and then you're like, okay, like how do you know what's relevant, what's not?
Yeah, so it's quite simple. Since I mean, it's again depending on how somebody configures Keploy. So if I would use Keploy to capture something like capture request in a live environment, and I would like to debug a particular request, I just need some way to get some kind of a request identifier, maybe some kind of a trace ID that we see in OpenTelemetry. I can search that in Keploy, and that should then give me that exact particular request along with everything that happened uh, with respect to that request. So yeah, that would essentially help me isolate that particular thing and replay for debugging.
Nice. Have you seen people use this for performance testing to see, hey, how does this service handle billions of requests? I don't know, almost a transaction based, without actually having to, go into production and do anything nuts like that.
Yeah, that's a use case I've been thinking about. But I think that as well as chaos engineering, chaos tests, and killing different instances of application and see how it acts under stress. Um, I mean, we have not done that yet because we feel that the tooling needs to mature further before we can get into performance testing. Because I feel um, we would need to really, because we're emulating dependencies, we're emulating databases. So we would, the ideal way this would work is when you record, you would also need to record those failure scenarios, right? Or we would need some way for Keploy to emulate or make a database failure, send a failure calls. So those things can be explicitly done, but I think it's still early stages, um, you know, for Keploy for that particular use case. I think it's a long way to go.
Is it possible to overuse Keploy, where you just completely rely on it and say, I trust it completely. I don't have to do any full end-to-end testing in a full-blown environment? I don't know. Is that a concern?
I don't think as like in the current state, it can replace everything that we have currently because there's definitely value in testing with real endpoints, right? Uh, I feel the value is more towards getting a quick response and being able to cover a lot more use cases than just core flows. So, yeah, I think end-to-end tests, having real network interactions, those are valuable, but people tend to prioritize the core flows because we have a lot of stuff to do, and um, I feel there something like Keploy can add value. But yeah, there's definitely still value in running real network interactions.
Yes, I'm thinking like in my old job, developers don't want to wait 3-4 hours for end-to-end tests to finish before they get the okay to submit. So this seems like a good compromise. Yeah, we'll run all these tests. Looks good. Let's put it to the next stage of the pipeline. Then we'll run maybe our end-to-end test overnight or something to do the extra coverage. So it seems more like an assistant rather than a replacement. Then,
Yep. In fact, we have seen use cases where the way the team started using Keploy was they would convert their existing tests to Keploy tests. Um, and the Keploy tests would run much faster, like in minutes compared to hours. And then they started adding more tests to Keploy. So essentially, most of the scenarios that would be caught by the regular testing pipeline would be caught by Keploy first, uh, unless there's something very weird happening in the network, right? Something which has not happened before at all. Maybe you updated the database or something external changed. Until something that very, very weird thing happens, it would be caught a lot earlier and a lot quicker. And yeah, and then there's always the other pipeline.
how do you convert test to Keploy? If you have an existing test, like you just mentioned.
Yeah, so I mean, you run the existing test suite and you record everything with Keploy, and yeah,
Oh,
there you go, Keploy
okay,
tests.
okay. Cool. It's that easy. So it doesn't
Yeah,
matter if someone's using Selenium, Playwright, Cypress. It's just going to pick up the traffic and almost act like a sniffer, like I said, and automatically
yeah,
generate. Nice.
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So any, like you mentioned, it's not fully mature yet to handle maybe performance testing. It may not even be something that's on your roadmap. Anything like AI or anything like that you see being baked in the future? I know AI is a hot topic. Just curious to know if you're messing around with anything funky over there right now.
Oh yeah, we've done a lot of experiments, and most LLM models today, I feel they're not really reliable as a test generator per se, right? So they could generate something really funky, something they would imagine libraries, and yeah, so they are definitely not reliable. But what they're really good at is reasoning, and given a particular input, they could probably think of some really interesting edge cases. So something we've been experimenting with and trying with some of our beta customers is, okay, you are using Keploy to capture and generate test cases. Normally, you would have to do it yourself or get a live user traffic to do it. What if you could, you know, take your API specs, Swagger, OpenAPI 3, and give that to an LLM model, and yeah, ask it to generate different edge cases based on that, and use Keploy to actually generate the real tests. So that way, the syntax will always be correct. The mocks, which are recorded by Keploy, are real interactions which happened. And Keploy can also, based on coverage, filter out all the noisy and faulty tests. So yeah, I think that can be an interesting combination we're trying. Yeah, so that's where we are with AI.
So I saw on the website something called Keploy's accurate noise detection feature. What's that?
Oh yeah, so we've had this from the beginning. So what we do is, whenever we're recording something and replaying, there could be noisy parameters, right? There could be timestamps. There could be something which is going to always change regardless of application behavior. So what Keploy would do is it would run, whenever it would capture something, it would rerun it again. But when it reruns, it will mock everything out, right? Similar to what it would do during testing. And then it would assert, okay, did anything change? Are the timestamps different? Is there any field which changed? And I know the application is still correct because it's the same application, same version. So that way I can find noisy parameters and not compare them during testing.
Awesome. So we mentioned CICD. How hard is it to integrate? It sounds like easy, but I don't know. Like, how hard is it to actually get it in an existing software development lifecycle to plug it into? Is it plug and play basically?
Yeah, it's a plug and play. Just add Keploy test as a stage, just one line, and yeah, and then you're good to go.
Nice. So I always ask when it's open source, how's the community? Sometimes you get a great solution, but you're like, this community is dead. It's going to die. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Keploy. How's the Keploy community? How active is it?
I think it's going really interesting so far. We get different kinds of users. Most of them want to maintain test coverage because that's part of their job. We recently got a lot of community members from Japan. I think there's a Hacker News equivalent there, and somebody mentioned Keploy, and yeah, so we got a bunch of users from there. I think so far the community has been really good. We've got a lot of feedback, and yeah, so far growing. I mean, I think the community is still there.
So, being a contributor and a maintainer yourself, how do you get people to contribute to open source? I mean, a lot of times people may complain in the community, but it's like not many people actually take up the hard work of actually implementing something. Do you have any tips on how to get started contributing, or how hard is it to contribute to the Kloy project if someone says, hey, I'm not a master developer, what can I do to help around here?
So what we typically do is we would label some issues as good first issues. And whenever we get an issue from a community user, we would try to break it down into, different tasks, which are relatively small and can be done by somebody who's not an expert. And Keploy is also written in Go, and we focused a lot on readability. So contributing is typically relatively easy. We try to document most of our methods and ensure that, okay, if somebody wants to contribute, they can go to the good first issues label and they can get started. So we get a lot of contributors, especially during GSOC and Hacktoberfest.
Awesome. So applications are always changing. How do you make sure your tests are up to date in Keploy? Is it just a matter of, do you regenerate tests often? And because it's so fast to create tests, like how do you make sure your tests are fresh and up to date, I guess, with the latest and greatest releases?
Yeah. Like you said, since it's easy to create, they're easy to update. So if something fails and you would get a diff, the user can decide, you know what, if this is the new expected behavior, you tell Keploy to normalize it, and yeah, that's it. Your tests are updated.
So if someone's listening to this, they're like, oh, this sounds great, but maybe I want to get some more in-person type of, see it in action. Is any events going on or online resources they can use to learn more about Keploy?
So the first place to start would be our Slack channels. We have a community there, and we are active. The second place would be, like, if you want to have a more direct conversation, the best channel would be our community calls. So we have that monthly, and anybody can come and share their experience, if they have a use case they want to get answered. So that's another channel. So I think those two are the best channels from the community.
Awesome. And we also have a lot of folks in India. I believe you're based in India. And I know there's a lot of meetups that go on that they like to attend. Is there any live events that if someone is in that area that could, I know India is huge, but any live events they could actually attend if they're hearing this? Like I said, there's a lot of guild members from the India.
So we have an event coming up in collaboration with Google to focus on open source contributions and getting started with open source in general. So it's in collaboration with the Google Startup team as well as the Google Summer of Code team. It's happening on 29th Feb in Bangalore. So yeah, I think that'll be a very nice event to check out, especially if somebody's interested in testing as well as open source.
Love it. Okay, Shubham, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their mocking kind of Keploy automation testing efforts? And what's the best way to find, contact you, and learn more about Keploy?
Best way to connect, again, Slack. I think we are available, and I'm also available one-to-one. And advice, I think that would be to keep mocks realistic and to record real behavior. I have faced a lot of problems when I would assert my mocks, or when I would make mocks myself, which are most of the times not true. I mean, they're not the real behavior. So I think that has bit me a lot. So I think, let's keep it as real as possible.
So head on over to Keploy.io and definitely check it out. It's also on GitHub, actually, and it has 3,000 stars. So it seems like it's well-liked. So definitely check it out. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's a great solution that people definitely need to try and get their hands on right away. So thank you so much. Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A486. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the TestGuild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the TestGuild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.